Let's see. Get you a link. I guess this is part of the live stream, so whoever's watching or whatnot, maybe now or later, sometime. Hello. A little bit of technical stuff here at the top of the Q&A while we get set up. But yeah, hope everybody's doing all right. Well, let's see here. Got 8 people. You guys are the first, the vanguard, tip of the spear. We'll get started here in a couple of minutes. All the social medias and whatnot situated. Hey, how's it going? Are these new glasses? No, they're not. They need to be. I desperately need a new prescription. But I don't usually wear glasses because of the reflection. But today is just it's a glasses kind of day. Pop this up, pop this out, so I don't have to see too many pictures of myself. Okay, how's everybody doing out there? I hope y'all's week's doing well, weathering the January all right. It's been like below 0 here the last few weeks, and it's cold. It's real cold. It's really very cold. I find that I don't do well with radiant heat that comes from the water heater. It's just something about it feels oppressive. So I usually sweat for most of the winter while it's well below freezing outside. So yes, let's get to the Q&A. How's it going, everybody? Yep, I've got some topics from the community post last week. So you guys are happy to take your questions from the chat, but we'll add them to our general Q&A doc, the backstage secret document that WebDM keeps, because I already have my set of questions lined up already. If I had to make this decision on the fly, we'd probably only get through like 3 questions. So I will take any questions that y'all have. Emma is in the chat, and so we're listening, but I already got our questions for today lined up. And we're just gonna hang out, chill. My mind will wander. That's okay. That's how it works. And we're gonna be talking about some fun stuff. It's not quite as heady last time, but who knows what'll happen, and who knows what'll come out. It's a lot like RPG that way. So yeah, here we go. This one is from Andrew. Question about party size limit. Do you think there is an optimal party size for D&D? I have played in groups where there were 4 PCs and some as high as 9 PCs. What considerations do you feel must be taken with really small or really large groups? I think certainly for like modern D&D, there is a 4 to 6 player like sweet spot. I think you can play with fewer than 4. 3-player D&D, depending on the players and their like class makeup, can be really fun and really work. I've played 2-player D&D before, and that's tough. Pruitt and I did that with Curse of Strahd, and it worked because I was a paladin, he was a cleric, and we always had like an NPC mage with us a lot of the time, so it just kind of worked out the way we played. But 4 to 5 is good. All the roles of the group can be covered. There's that 5th character in case someone goes down. It's not quite as many decisions that have to be gotten through in combat as like 6 or 7 or up to 9. She's 9 people playing 5th edition. Shit, and that's a lot. There's also gonna be a lot of cursing here, guys. So I don't know if this got sensitive ears or children around or something, but who knows what'll come out of my mouth. Anyway, 9, that's a lot of people to be playing 5e. So yeah, I would not want to run that. To me, the big question in playing with that many players, like really large groups, is like just dithering. It's very easy for the players that are not going to be as engaged to really fade into the background, and for there to be more chances of like conflicting opinions over like what to do about a problem or how to approach something. So there's just more points of conflict, and the like. So at least in my experience, there's also like action economy stuff of like balancing combats that could pose an interesting challenge and sort of a fun element to the party that doesn't like completely eat up table time. So that's a lot of players. But for older editions of D&D, it would work. I played original D&D with up to 13 other players plus our henchmen. That was a lot. The level disparity was pretty high too. We had as low as first level and as high as seventh level in that group, and it was a pretty hot mess in many ways, because the lower level party members were pretty much treated like hirelings of the higher level characters, because for many reasons. It just wasn't interesting. I don't think the DM enjoyed it. We didn't play with that many people. So I really do think that 4 to 6 is the sweet spot. And if you've got like a really small group, the sidekicks from Tasha's, or just running an NPC alongside the party that's with the understanding that like they're not making any major decisions or anything, they're just there to help out, or having the players play 2 characters each, that could sometimes work. And for really large groups, like if you can just find somebody who's like, all right, the buck stops here. When the game is ground to a halt or combat's taking too long or something, like what are our hard limits to keep play going? Is there someone in the party that me as a dungeon master could turn to and go, okay, you guys have had a lot of time to decide on this. What are you guys doing? And have an answer, not just, continuation of the debate, or to say like, hey, we're trying to keep everybody's time in mind. Let's move through combat as quickly as we can. Understand that we're going to be playing fast and loose with the rules, because we don't want to crack open a book to look anything up with that many players. And if you don't know what your thing does, then just as best as you can remember it, we'll make a ruling, move on, look it up afterwards. And to me, that's really the way to handle a large group, because otherwise it can just really get bogged down. And hopefully you got some players in that big group who are willing to take on some like co-DMing responsibilities of like helping other players work through rules issues, or sort of acting as a delegate DM for some things, so that I as a DM could say like, will you help, here's a monster manual, help the player figure out how their wild shape works, will you? While we do this, it's gonna be 5 turns until it's there, until it's them. So there's plenty of time for them to get that sorted, that kind of thing. It can work. It's just, it takes consideration. So yeah, fun times. Single player D&D is fun. Like just see if you can make it. don't really change a lot. It's it can be very fun to try to play traditional D&D as a solo character without really any attempt made to make it manageable for a single character. That can be fun for a certain kind of play style. I remember to drink this time around so my voice doesn't completely start cracking. John asks, is there a way to do encumbrance that is actually fun and not just keeping track of weights? Doesn't have to be realistic, but something that can be fun. Yes, as someone that doesn't mind keeping track of encumbrance weight, just regular, that's my play preference. I really like slot encumbrance, whether it's like a fixed number, saying like Troika, where you have like 12 encumbrance slots, and you actually like in the heat of combat have to roll under your encumbrance slot to retrieve something from your inventory, because you're doing it under pressure. Or if the slots are based on like strength or constitution, or something like that's what we're doing in Weird Wastelands. Is it's factored, by strength or constitution, whichever you prefer, to represent either raw carrying capacity or just your ability to pack well and endure long load hauling, I guess. And that way it's like, okay, usually it's manageable. It's like, okay, there's maybe 20 items at most you're keeping track of. For the most part, it's probably closer to 10 to 12. These are significant items that your player's carrying. You can always say like, okay, your food for 2 weeks is worth, a slot, or all of your camping supplies and outdoor survival gear, 2 slots, arrows, 1 slot, but there's like, 20 or 30 of them to that slot, that kind of thing. You either bundle small items into one, and then they just all occupy that 1 slot, or items take up more than one. Plate armor might eat up half of your slots because it's plate armor, and that's just a decision you have to make. To me, I like making these decisions as a player because it makes the world more real to me. If my character inventory is treated just like a bag of holding, but I don't actually have a bag of holding, which is like I hate that magic item. It's like, I feel like I'm playing in a cartoon, and I want the world, no matter what kind of world we're playing in, no matter the realism level or the magic level or whatever, I want my character to sort of feel like they're lived in. And that means keeping track of like where their stuff is, how much they're carrying around is important to me. And sometimes I make fun of it. Like I had a bugbear who kept everything just in a big bag, just like carried around like a demented Santa, everything from his food to his weapons to cash, it's just in his sack, or if it's like, no, my potions are here and this is where my spell scrolls are. And it's very important to me that the DM knows where that is, because the game we're playing, those details are important. Makes the world feel real to me, but not everybody wants to do a bunch of triple digit addition while they like have to look up multiple rule books for the weight of all the stuff they have. Like, don't worry about that. Just use slots. It's fine. And then, don't even worry about it. That's really all I have to say about it. Hopefully what we have in Weird Wastelands will be a fun example to use for that. So next one from Aussie Leftist says, excuse me, what are some fun ways to sprinkle magic items or treasure throughout a dungeon? I have thought about giving the main enemies an item or two to use during their encounters, but there must be some more interesting things I can do. Yeah, give me just a second. I'll answer that question. Excuse me. So yeah, this is sort of the obvious, sort of first thing. Got some magic items you want to give the players, put them on the enemies that the player's going to run into. Players will do what players will do. Those NPCs are going to be blood splatters on the wall. Now the players have magic items. Classic D&D. But it doesn't always have to be that way. I think adding magic items to monster encounters can be a fun way to like spice them up. Like, who knew those 2d6 goblins would have a wand of magic missiles, for instance? But sometimes it's fun to just hide them places and see if the players will look and peek. My favorite place to hide a magic item is just in a plain dungeon room or corridor that has nothing else going on in it. It's just under a loose flagstone, and all they have to do is just say they're poking around on the floor to find it. And I usually use that as a way to show that all the players have to do is start sniffing around and poking in the environment to start finding clues and hidden things. For me, building adventurous environments is about both like having preset clues that I know are going to be there, that I know the party will find or have a good chance of finding, and then having some that are just in my back pocket that it makes sense to slot in anywhere, and I can like work it in the fiction. It doesn't seem, out of place. And I want to reward players for poking their noses around. However, they only get one freebie. The first time they look anywhere, the first time they poke their nose, I'll give them something. Let them know there's stuff to be found here. After that, they got to work for it. And it's things like, yeah, you might find magic items, but it's at the bottom of a outhouse on the, you're going to have to go diving through monster poop to get this thing. It'll be worth it. right? I'm not going to shortchange you and give you something terrible, but it's not going to be easy or pleasant or dignified. You know, it could be that monsters have the magic items and don't realize that they're magic items and instead are using them for some other purpose, you know, like an ogre with a magic dagger that's using it as a toothpick, or a, you know, bestial monstrosity or something that just has a magic amulet because it's shiny, you know, and has made it a part of their nest or something. You know, if it's a dungeon environment that used to be inhabited, these could be just, you know, left behind, hidden by other adventurers, and, you know, they meant to come back and find them, but they didn't. Those are the ones that might be trapped, or like finding them might be really dangerous. So things like up chimney chutes is a good one, sort of like magic items hidden up a, you know, an air shaft or something. Magic items hidden at the bottom of pit traps is a classic one, where it's like the only way you find this is to fall in or go in at least. And then, you know, some dead adventurers there with D4 magic items, you know, that you could find. A lot of times I'll either have these be specific items that they can find, or just this is an opportunity to find something random. We don't know what it's going to be, but you clicked in the right box and we're going to see what comes out. You know, so they could be that. They could be, I had one when I was a player in original D&D, this room that had this mural on it. And the mural had like a Medusa, a rust monster, and a couple other things, like just nasty monsters and piles of treasure in this painting. And the idea was that this was a magic painting and you could activate it and everything in that painting would become real. And so you'd have to deal with these 4 like really nasty monsters. And the first time we did it, we TPK'd, but the DM felt really bad about making a mistake in how he ran the combat and felt it was unfair that our characters all just bit the dust, and then let us run it again from initiative. And we came out ahead that time, and TPK'd on the next random encounter because he rolled a lich, and the rest of the party didn't have an anti-magic scroll up like I did. So I guess it wasn't a total TPK. My character survived that one. But it was fun because it's tempting, right? Like, here's this big mural. You know you're going to have a shitstorm of a fight when you activate the mural. But you know, if you can plan it and lay the battlefield and think cleverly about how you're going to deal with this thing, you can have, you know, riches beyond your wildest imaginations. Of course, if you got to use encumbrance to make it worth it, so that then they can go, well, shit, we don't have enough carrying capacity to carry all that out. What's the most important treasure to take? So yeah, that's how I do treasure in like adventuring environments. So fun times. Let's see. Here we go. Fenris 2000 asks, have you ever been challenged by a player in a good way? Someone who has pushed you, pushed what you prep in ways that you weren't expecting. Yeah, for sure. I love these kinds of players. I find a lot of them are usually newer to RPGs, but not always. And I've been surprised by all kinds of players, people who, you know, I thought our play styles might be incompatible. I don't know if you guys hear anything. There's a rocket ship taking off in the background. So just don't even worry about it. It'll be done in a few minutes. But yeah, like, I think the first player that really surprised me was a player who was a prior DM of Pruitt and ours, and we had pretty much told him we don't want to play D&D with you while you're running it. And I was like, I'll run D&D and you can play. And he was a great player, phenomenal, and kept me on my toes and always engaging with the world, took it seriously. And like, to me, that those are some of the traits of a good player that I take when I play. Is like, I found that the things that made me dislike him as a DM were the exact things I liked about him as a player. And like the fact that he approached problems as if they were open-ended, that there's different ways that they could, you know, that he could come at them, that he could use his character as a kind of avatar in the game world to engage with it as a game. And it was going to take more than just like the lowest hanging fruit of what I could think up of to challenge and pose any kind of fun D&D session for him. And I felt like it really kind of pushed me in that sense to be a better DM, to understand the rules better, and to present a fully realized game. But I've had other players who, were completely surprised me by just completely thinking out of the box. They either didn't, play D&D prior to, us playing together, and so just had different expectations of the game, different ways of thinking about it. And I really like that in a player. I really like a player who doesn't think of what we're doing as like playing a rule set, and more thinks of it as playing this world. And when we need to, we're going to use this rule set. But like, it's the world they take seriously, and like their character in it. And regardless of like play style, I find that that's really kind of the common thing about the players who've challenged me in a good way, is that they took what was going on in the game really seriously. They wanted to be more involved with it. They wanted to like make it theirs. And like, I was like, once I picked up on that, I was like, yeah, let's do it. What part of this do you want to get involved with? Let's do it. Because I was just waiting for any player to want to engage with something I'd created. And I didn't really have a strong expectation of how they would engage with it or what parts they would, just that they would want to in some capacity. Because I can see how, like, there are some ways in which the players that have challenged me in a different context would be seen as pushy, or stealing the spotlight, or taking too much control of the direction of play. And that's something that I've tried to be sensitive to as I run games, because I have had situations where players have seemed to want to steer the game in a direction no one else wants to go, and had to tell those players, hey, either we're going to try this a little bit, and if everybody's not on board, we're done, or like, you got to pick something else. Everybody else is playing this game. You're playing this something else. If you want to play with us, you're the one who's going to have to make the adjustments. Sometimes those players have, appreciated that kind of talk, and other times that's been when they exited. And so like, I can see how like a player that's like comes with goals and like wants to, approach the game in an engaging way that the DM isn't necessarily prepared for, that could be seen as like, well, look at this player, they're really playing out of bounds. And like, I never wanted to stifle that in my players. I always wanted to encourage them to engage deeper with the games I was running. So yeah, I don't know that I have anywhere else to go with that, but yeah, I find I'm always surprised by players. It's what I love about DMing. Never bored when playing. All right, this next one I think is gonna be this may be one of those where some of y'all are hate it and others are gonna get excited by it. But Matthew asks, and this is for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, how the heck is hide supposed to work? Supposed to even work? I want to get this right, Matthew. For example, stuff like Skulker and Fog Cloud would make them invisible, disadvantage, just confusion all abounds on Matthew's end. And it is, first off, you're not alone. Lots of people confused about hide. Easy to be confused because there's only like 5 different places you'd have to look in the rule books just to get a basic understanding of the mechanical elements involved here, let alone stuff like Skulker and Fog Cloud. And because of that, every table is going to run it differently. Every DM is going to run it differently. So what I say here is simply how I run it, and is not definitive for, how D&D ought to be run or should be run, or how you'll experience it. But here's how I run hide. I like to be generous with cover in my environments, especially during combat. I know the DMG and 5th edition in general is like, if you're in combat, you're generally aware of other combatants around you, etc. I've been in very few situations where my like adrenaline and situational awareness have been called into question. And I'm not an adventurer by any means. My instinct is to say that you're not 100% aware of everything going on around you in a combat, even if something isn't hidden. So I like to be generous in combat, especially for rogues, about when they can hide, under what conditions they can. But regardless of in combat, out of combat, whatever, there has to be something that breaks line of sight, right? And if that means I have to temporarily consider facing and positioning and all that, then we'll just imagine it for a minute. We have our brains, we can do that. I'll talk to the player. What are you trying to achieve? What's going on? What's happening? Because, for the most part, they're wanting to get something out of this, either advantage for sneak attack or slip past somebody. I want to know what that is. And then it's a matter of, I wait until the question of whether or not they could be seen comes up before they roll the die. They don't roll as soon as they go, I hide. I've increasingly come to just not like that, because if they roll really poorly, it just creates this weird moment where they go, well, do I know that I've rolled this poorly? And I'm like, no, because we didn't need to roll yet. Like, once a character says they try to hide, unless in that exact moment there's somebody trying to spot them, we're only going to roll when the question of whether or not they could be seen comes up, right? In that case, I revert to the stealth rules in the using abilities section of the basic rules here, right? Like, there's that whole section on hiding. It references passive perception, both light and heavy obscurement. And so, like, those three things right there are the core of hiding in 5th edition. It's basically some characters, for instance, skulkers, can hide in light obscurement, light foliage, light fog, dim light, that kind of thing. Heavy obscurement, like darkness, heavy foliage, hiding behind a cart, that sort of thing, just like a million people in a crowd trying to lose someone, that kind of thing is, whether or not they even get a chance to make that check depends on a lot of factors. If it's light levels, then they have dark vision that comes into play. If they don't have dark vision, they're effectively blinded. Interesting to note, like, invisibility is like the only beneficial condition in the game. And it basically is like, you're treated as heavily obscured for the purposes of hiding. And so, like, that's what you need to understand if you're a DM running that and you're a player, right? Heavy obscurement is what you're looking for to hide. Heavy obscurement blocks line of sight. And for me, there's a lot of different ways to run this on the flip side, right? Like, when my monsters are trying to use their stealth to sneak up on players, like, if you're running it by the book, this will almost never come up. Like, if you're going to roll like a dozen, dexterity stealth checks for the goblins trying to sneak up on the party, one of them's going to beef it, and one of the party members will spot him, and then the ambush is ruined, and then you never have a moment of surprise. I think ambushes should be used sparingly in versus players. Otherwise, you could really get into paranoid adversarial playstyle. But the way I run ambushes for monsters is with group checks. And I'll just make a group check versus the passive perceptions of any, the party members. Unless the party members tell me they're specifically on watch, I just use their basic passive perception, and then give my ambushers advantage to represent that the party's not like not paying attention, but there's, no one says they're on lookout or keeping an eye out for danger, that kind of thing. Then this accounts for momentary distractions and that sort of thing. So the ambushers will have advantage on their rolls. That's group check versus the passive perceptions of the party. And that's just how I run it, because it's easiest for me. And sometimes that group check doesn't work. Sometimes some of the members are spotted and some of them aren't. It allows for a lot of different situations where, like, the ranger and rogue have noticed that there's someone trying to sneak up on them, but if they do something now, then they might spoil a chance to, like, ambush the ambusher, right? Can they communicate the fact that they know what's going on with the rest of the party without tipping off the ambushers? Those are those moments that I want to try to have come up and play. And I find, like, running it that way helps. And for players, I try to be generous with when and where is cover. You might have it one round and not the next. That's just how it goes. So hope that helps. Yes, there are like 5 different places you got to look at, but I would start with using ability scores. Chapter 7, at least of the basic rules. I think it's the same in the PHP. And then there's that box of like hiding that kind of helps, but you're still going to have to like make up a lot of shit if you're the DM for when this happens and under what conditions. So yeah, fun times. Anyway. I know a lot of DMs handle hide very differently. It's one of those things that I think is, I wish 5th edition was a little bit clearer on, but I wouldn't want like the sort of comprehensiveness that prior editions have tried to capture with hiding. I like that it's a little loose and that you can play around with it. Other thing to note, just because we're talking about it, it's 5e rule shit, so you've gone forever, is that you're invisible, you just can't be seen. You can still be detected, still be attacked. They have disadvantage to attack you. You have advantage to attack them. Crucially, they can't target you with spells, but being invisible does not make you hidden. You have to take the hide action to do that in combat, or just say you're trying to be quiet, which is all it takes in my game. That's all I have to do. Trying to be quiet. All right. When does it matter? We'll check. We can get on with the game. All right. Appreciate everybody. I'm not quite keeping an eye on the chat, but I have seen some tips and the like. Appreciate those. We always appreciate your support. This is my full-time job, and as well as CEO and partner Emma's. So yep, always appreciate it. Silent Brad, hello Silent Brad, how's it going? Says, hey Jim and Emma, I was trying to think of a way to ask this without being super long-winded. I appreciate that, Silent Brad. How do you run an epic battle, or perhaps dynamic is a better word, without it becoming just a boring slog through HP, particularly when streaming your games? Give me a chance to think about this. Excuse me. I have to have a heater on my back because, well, I sit too much. Who would have imagined? So trying to keep myself limber. I feel you, Silent. Like 5th edition has this, like, just bags of hit points. And I find like that hit like kittens to me, like most monsters. So like, to me, I try to find ways to make a fight, or rather a monster, more durable without making them a bag of hit points. So reactive defenses are a good one if they're legendary, some sort of legendary action that boosts their defense, especially if that defense is like very specific or, or tied to something in the environment. Example, this would be like, a parry, for instance, is a way to boost defense against like weapon attacks, for instance. But unless they're a special, like, stupid custom gish NPC that I made that players are going to be pissed off at, they're not going to be able to like parry spell attacks, but maybe one of them can. Definitely be an elf, because that'll just make the players hate them so much more. If they're an elf, they can parry their spell attacks. Like, I like giving my monsters with legendary resistance, basically they can use, instead of having legendary resistance, they can use a legendary action as if it were legendary resistance. So they're not just limited to 3, but it does eat up their legendary actions. So it's basically like they can choose offense or defense with that, if they like. I find it cuts down on the metagaming of like, we got to hit them with 3 and then we're golden. And also like introduces a different element on my part of like, do I go for offensive actions with my legendary actions or defensive for legendary resistances? It kind of like complicates things, and also like makes for fun fiction because you can narrate what those effects look like and the flow of a combat by the way that they use their legendary actions for defense or offense. Especially in higher level games where you're dealing with like status effects, they're going to shut down a monster and make for just a really anticlimactic fight. That can be fun. But I try to think of like custom traits or features of the environment that they could have as a temporary boost. Either their attuned to some magic bullshit in the area that you could break, or there's like a natural bullshit that they're tuned to and giving them a buff that they could block off somehow. I like rooting these things in the environment and in the circumstances and conditions of the fight, right? Like, is there something I can tie this ability to that gives the party a reason to interact with the environment? Maybe they could get that buff if they, stepped in the right spot or used an action in the right place at the right time, kind of thing. You could also use layer actions separate from legendary actions. So like, I like the idea of like a goblin warren is a layer unto itself and will have a layer action, even if there's no legendary goblin there at all, to use a lower level example. And so this is even easier to do with higher level shit because they're like, you got to think of these fantastic, crazy locations anyway, that are more fantastic, more magical. Just like, what are some ways in which someone who got here first and was able to like attune themselves to this place or seize the high ground or whatever it is that can take advantage of this feature of the magical environment to give them this thing that's not just more hit points. Maybe it's a bit of regeneration. Maybe it's resistance. Maybe it's a way to temporarily boost their AC. Maybe it's if they die, they come back at the top of the next round with all their hit points back at once or twice or as many times as it takes for you to destroy this thing, while they do it. There's an encounter with a Balor in Weird Wastelands that's like that, where it's like, this creature has minimum hit points for a Balor. But if you kill it, it's going to come back the next round with minimum hit points and keep fighting you until you kill it again and it explodes next round. And like, you have to, the thing that's keeping it coming back is the thing you have to deal with. You just also have to deal with, well, Balor, and its solar handler is trying to stop you. So good luck. That's what I try to do with epic fights. Other things you can do, I know it's a little long-winded, but this is a big topic, is like, give the party more than one thing to do at a time. You can get away with lower hit point monsters if the party can't afford to just wail on them. If there's other things that they have to do, either features of the environment they have to interact with, or, a running battle that they have to, keep up with, or lots of cover, things like that. But like, give them a dilemma that's other than just beat the snot out of this bad guy. And you can get away with like lower hit points and the like in a more dynamic combat. So hope that helps. It works for lower level stuff too. So it's not just like higher level, but yeah. Good times. Let me give my brain a second to catch up because all right. There's a lot of tangents I had to pull myself back from. It's like walking a dog that hasn't had a walk in a long time, where it's like every interesting smell, they want to sniff at it. But it's like, we got to get on this walk. We can't just like stop at every blade of grass that smells interesting. You got to keep, get our heart rate up. So yeah, I think the analogy works. All right. All right, here's a good one to follow up with. Alexander asks, how do you transition from mid-tier to high tier smoothly and effectively? This is one of those questions where I could answer flippantly, but I honestly, you started it in low tier. The transition from low to mid to high tier is meant to sort of mirror a character's rise in importance and sphere of control and influence within a campaign world. And we're talking the lingua franca D&D here, right? Additionless D&D, just sort of level 1 to 20 kind of thing. And like, you build that by creating a world that will accommodate those characters, right? Where other members, other NPCs, other people of power with influence and authority and the like in the campaign world followed similar paths. It's a cliche now, right? But in early D&D, the reason why like monarchs and shopkeepers, right, were a higher level, one of the reasons is sort of reflect that this could be the end retirement for a character well played, right? You know, in their youth, they went off adventuring. When they retired, they were able to, you know, become wealthy landowners, get titles, all that kind of stuff, right? That's sort of the end goal of a lot of characters. And like what I think the mix-up happened in either the presentation of these levels of play with you know, with D&D and traditional RPGs, or just something, I don't know why. It's that we wanted to capture what was going on in like low and mid low tier and just stretch it to high level. And in order to transition smoothly, you have to have a game and players who understand that as they play, their place in the game world, their influence in the game world, and the scope of play is going to change. That the shit they do at first level is not going to be the same shit they're doing at 15th level. You know, that they understand that like somewhere along the way, their place in the game world will necessitate a change in how they approach it. It doesn't mean that you have to like abandon the adventure entirely, right? I don't think it means they sit in wizards' towers and never go adventuring, or you know, command armies from thrones and, you know, like Orcus and never leave. You know, but that more things become part of the game, and that like at some point they leave the dungeon behind for the most part, because they're done crawling around in stupid holes with having to worry about torches and pit traps, you know. And then they have to deal with like the hazards of navigating a fantastic and dangerous wilderness. But eventually that's not a problem either, because they can conjure their own food and teleport across the place. And those challenges aren't going to be sufficient. So they move to the next level, right? And your game world has to be ready for that. You have to have been ready and willing to accommodate that from the beginning. And I think that there's just a lot of like, not a lot of good examples of how that works and how that would look. Not a lot of rule support for it. You're gonna have to do a lot of the heavy lifting yourself. And it's gonna take a lot from your players to accept that as they play the game and the game changes, the scope of it changes, the place of their characters and the power level and all that stuff changes. Like that's going to come with like narrative implications. It's going to mean that you've left behind this rich experience of play that you can draw on. Like, hey, you remember that NPC from way back? Yeah, they're back. They're, you know, like I'll stick with this. They're writing for Weird Wastelands right now because that's where my head's at, working on the tier 4 location. One of the challenges that I wanted to throw out was like, okay, there's a ghost of some type for every humanoid the party has collectively killed since first level. And this is for like calibrated for 20th level characters. And it's like, they could be specters, they could be wraiths, whatever, how the individual details of it are open to the group, because some groups are going to be like, this is no. Other groups will appreciate the challenge of having to deal with a lot of low CR enemies as a higher level party. Others are going to get a kick out of the fact that these ghosts don't want to kill you necessarily. They want to be back. They don't want to be dead. I mean, if you don't help them, it could get nasty. But you could also resurrect them all, and the location has the means to do that. And you know, it would actually wouldn't cost that much at all other than your time. And I wanted to put that because some groups are going to really like that. Some groups are going to take that and go like, hey, let's look back over our adventuring career and do some juicy in-character dialogue with it, look at our characters' actions and whatever, maybe they get a kick out of it. Maybe others will get a kick out of a really weird and bizarre combat encounter where they just unleash all their AoE against these poor CR1 specters who just wanted their old lives back. And others are going to take a look at it and go like, no, I'm going to go with this other one. So, not trying to write too much in it because not everybody's going to want that one. But you can see how like what I'm trying to do there with that encounter is, and illustrative is like, this is something that you got to be thinking about from the beginning. And I think it's part of the the sense of loss that a lot of DMs feel if they don't have campaigns that get to that level. Players can feel it too. It sort of feels like, well, it's pointless. Games fizzle out. They don't make it that level, scheduling, player conflicts, whatever. And that's a tragedy, right? That's a missed opportunity. But if you want that to ever be a possibility, you can't let the sense that it'll never happen prevent you from being prepared for it. And so, like, always having in your back pocket, like, this idea of you're ready for that transition, because the world is built with the assumption it will happen. And there is a place for the PCs in positions of authority and power. The scope and scale of the game will change from rustic village D&D to city intrigue D&D to cosmic adventure D&D. When you're thinking about it as a whole thing, it's easier to make that transition, because you start laying the seeds the instant they become relevant, even if it's like second level. So that could be like a whole thing. So I like that one. Like I said, I've been thinking about tier 4 play a lot lately, and I think it's something that a lot of groups miss out on because of the challenges of getting there. But it's certainly worth it, and it's a shame there's not more. It's a shame there's not more official support for it. It sucks, but it is what it is. It gives us the freedom to do whatever we want, you know. All right, what time am I on? Oh goodness, only 45 minutes. Time's flying. We're gonna get through a lot of these. We might get through all the ones I wanted to get through, which lets us get through the backlog. It might be exciting. What do you guys think? I'm seeing a lot of things over here in the chat, but I'm not a multitasking kind of guy. I like to just focus on the one thing. Otherwise, you'll recall the dog metaphor earlier. Anyway, James asks, love the name, great name. Do you make all your campaign villains related, or do you mix things up? And when is too early to reveal the BBEG's existence to the party, the big bad evil guys' existence to the party? Never too early. And that's a serious, like, Curse of Strahd, I think works great because you meet Strahd within like 5 minutes of getting into Barovia. You know, like, I think that the thing that I can't stand about a lot of adventure path type modules is that the big bad guy isn't revealed until like the third act, and the party is dealing with stuff they don't quite understand. It's very reactive, you know. It's very like, oh, the events have been set in motion and status quo is disrupted, and the players have to put it all back together the way it was. That works once for me personally. I don't know about you guys, but I think the earlier you introduce them, the more opportunities you give the players to get invested, to interact with the antagonists of your game in a way that's going to leave the antagonist alive at the end of it. You know, there's lots of ways to justify why the antagonist doesn't just wipe them off the map then and there, you know, because they're not, you know, they don't want to yet is usually the answer I give myself. But like, I like keeping the villains that I use sort of varied. I don't usually think up too many of them ahead of time, usually one or two to get started. Usually in the beginning of a campaign, I'll either have like a clear, this is a problem that you can solve kind of quest, you know, set up, maybe a handful of those. And then a few handful interest groups, factions, and the like that are in tension with each other. And then depending on how the events of play unfold, may approach the PCs to try to get them in on the action. And so I let my villains develop organically out of that. Excuse me. And so I let my villains develop organically out of that, because I don't want to get too invested in a villain before I know what kind of game I'm running. And I don't know what kind of game I'm running until usually the third or fourth session, because that's about how long it takes for a party, even the players who are, you know, used to playing with each other and did the session zero, all that stuff. Like it still takes a while for it to get its feet under it and to get going, for the players to get to know their characters, for me as a DM to to know my world well enough to run it without too many hiccups or interruptions. Yeah. Usually campaigns can have a stuttering start, but I don't find that as a problem. And so I let like the villains come out of that. I tend to work in broad archetypes until I need to add detail and nuance, which I always try to do because I think that makes for more interesting villains. Sometimes they don't last that long. Sometimes the party learns of the villain and does something about the villain in sort of one session, and that's just how it goes for them. Which is why I tend to work with big organizations of villains and the like, so that no one element being eliminated too early ruins whatever thing they had going on. Cults being a good example of this, mercenary companies, bandit groups, that kind of thing. Not a lot of lone villains in my campaigns. I don't tend to like that kind of thing. So yeah, I also like to mix up what kind of villains I create, really brutes and casters, sneaky types. In that sense, I think in terms of like the 4th edition, monster rolls, I find that can be helpful as well. But also just like name this villain in like 3 words, just like sum them up in three words is usually how I approach creating them. And then as I need more, I'll add it in play. I don't like making too much beforehand because, like I said, I never know what's going to stick usually until we're in session and the like. And too many times spent a lot of time getting invested in villains that were like either just erased quickly or the players were like, yeah, this guy sucks. I'm not gonna no. And so I wait. I'll get invested in them. Just I wait to get invested when the party gets invested instead of ahead of time. So yeah. Excuse me. All right. Ugh, excuse me. Great. It's the riveting live stream. Yawning over here. Way to go. All right. LICJR1018 asks, what do you feel are must-have staples for running a Sword and Planet science fantasy campaign? All right. For one, swords. Got to be a reason for them, right? Whether they're laser swords, lightsabers, whatever, whether it's a shield that the slow blade penetrates, or you just go like the 40K route and they're like, well, they're cool, so they still have swords, and also they're like spinning blades and powered with psychic energy and things like that. So like I think that if you include spaceships and space combat, like boarding actions and things like that, then melee weapons make a kind of sense, especially if there's any kind of like hardness to the sci-fi elements. You don't want to go firing off a lot of guns or lasers or like in a boarding action. You can see like knives and axes, especially if all you have to do is puncture a spacesuit to take someone out of a fight. That could be interesting. But like for a Sword and Planet, to me, this is soft sci-fi, right? There's spaceships, there's planets, right? But we're not worried about the hazards of vacuum or exactly how these ships work. They're there for stylistic reasons. And so like decadent civilizations, usually some sort of galactic empire or pan-galactic empire or something like that. Maybe they're from another dimension or something. I think there's got to be a desert planet. There absolutely has to be a planet that's just a desert, because like Mars is the reason why. Like we've just been staring up at it, just it's just there, so close and so far away, and just defiant in its lack of life or something interesting going on in it. So you got to have a desert planet that's better than Mars. You need like some sort of weird lizard to ride, right? I think there's got to be a riding lizard, no horses or anything like that. Whether it's a quadruped or a biped, I think is entirely up to you and the taste of your group. Some sort of reason for there to be heroic nudity. I'm thinking of like the Frazetta painting style of just like they have on some leather straps and bandoliers and a belt and maybe like a Speedo of some kind. So I'd probably give some kind of like unarmored defense bonus or something just for pure aesthetics, just get everybody in the mood, you know. But trying to think of some other staples and not just rip off Edgar Rice Burroughs, but like I think the idea of sort of like a seedy kind of, you know, just a pirate's bay, but for space, not necessarily like Mos Eisley, but like a space station or some sort of artificial environment where there's a mingling of the more seedier elements of it. Like to me, a good Sword and Planet is like just one step removed from space opera, right? It's grand, it's sweeping, it's melodramatic, but like Sword and Planet is more gritty and sort of the sword and sorcery cousin to high fantasy, if we're using pure fantasy terminology here. So like somewhere where the players can get involved in some underhanded shit, some scum and villainy type stuff, I think also needs to be there. Princesses in disguise, a must of Sword and Planet. Ancient prophecies, always a good one. Some sort of space magic, the Force, science, sorcery, psionic bullshit to your taste. Could be tied with an alien species or drugs or something, you know, depending on the kind of game you like playing. But yeah, I think those are really, really good. I think swashbuckling is the kind of secret sauce of Sword and Planet. In the same way that like understanding how Westerns work can help you run like just baseline D&D, having an understanding of like swashbuckling type stories can help with Sword and Planet because it's just like a palette swap, I think. Yeah, that's my entirely uninformed, uneducated opinion on that one. So you're welcome. Let's see. All right, we got three more, and then I am calling it. But yeah, so here we go. I'll get through these maybe a little faster. We'll see. Excuse me. Placecrafter Charlie asks, what piece of media has been inspiring you lately? Not just for running games or making content, but just made you feel creative in any capacity. There's this show on the BBC called Taskmaster. I think it's the BBC at least. I'm pretty sure. And it's like British comedians doing tasks for this other British comedian. I don't know any of the celebrities. It's just funny shit. like every episode of it is just, there's something about it that will have me in stitches. They're not playing for money, which I like. I've realized I was very taken with, like, after watching a couple episodes, like they're not playing for like 20 grand that's gonna help them go on vacation or save their mom or something, you know, like they're just playing for the fun of it. But like the more I watched it, the more I realized like this is some good DM training shit, because the tasks involved are open-ended, open to interpretation. They almost always have some sort of restriction, and there's an element of like the participant, the player of this thing, and it's kind of like an escape room. This is maybe the closest thing to think of it as, but it's also arts and crafts and all kinds of weird shit. And like the way that you interpret the task, like make the best snowman in 20 minutes. What do you got? It's the middle of summer. What do you got? You know, make the best noise. You have 15 minutes. You know, draw the biggest circle. You know, those are some of the more simpler ones, but there's ones that's like, get me the best gift. You have 20 weeks. You know, like there's this element of it that is interpretive and like, okay, how do I approach this? Others of them involve like, you know, they're sent into a room and are told to do a thing, and the room has clues on how to solve it if only they would look around. But the thing that they have to do is so engrossing, they never look that on the ceiling it says, you know, here's the answer. And like there's several that are like that in the seasons I've watched, where like in addition to just being funny, and all the comedians are, you know, they're funny people, and the the situations and the stuff they have to do are just really hilarious. It's fun to watch people just go, just like completely, their brain just freeze. It's they're like, I don't know how to do this. How do I build a snowman in the middle of summer in 20 minutes? But like, you just kind of see how you can present things in an open-ended and interpretive way. And just to me, it gets me thinking about all kinds of things, not just that it's enjoyable to watch in of itself, but it just makes me think of like, oh man, this is how you can add details to an environment in the game you're running. Because there's really no such thing as me not preparing to run a game. It's just how my brain works. Like, like, okay, that's how you could do that, right? There's a button. What does the button do? Who knows what it does? But if they examine the room a bit more, they might notice that like when they push it, this part of it changes and that part of it doesn't. And it's just like, it's a show that rewards, it just pushes a lot of my buttons. And one of them is like being detail oriented and able to problem solve creatively under pressure is what makes the show really great. In addition to the humiliation that the participants have to go through. That's fun too. Yeah. So Taskmaster, it's fun. I've been watching it on YouTube. I don't know where else it is, but worth a watch. Yeah. Tridevious says, how do you describe a room with a trap in it where it's not obvious, but at the same time, the party has a chance to disarm or avoid it? How do you run it precisely so it is more than a simple saving throw or ability check? So this is one of those things where number one, I assume that adventurers are not stupid, that they are competent, that they are alert to danger, even if they're not like especially paying attention for it. They're not like just blindly blundering through places unless the players say they are. And so I assume that the party proceeds when they're in a place that would have traps in it, like a dungeon or an enemy stronghold or something, that they're proceeding cautiously. And I don't like gotcha traps. I don't like, hit point tax. You didn't you didn't say the magic word kind of traps. And to me, this is the dilemma of 5e, at least, because it's like, if you're relying on passive perception, you're setting the DCs for what that is. And so you are deciding whether or not they run into a trap in some ways, if you're using that method. And I just find that the things that are interesting about traps are how you overcome them and how you deal with them. And like, you have to know there's a trap there, or the players have to know there's a trap there in order to do that. So I like seeding my descriptions of the environment with clues to the trap, right? If there's a fire trap, then I just give it 2 seconds of thought. What's making the fire? And if it's anything material, real, it's not just like it summons magic fire bullshit, because it does, right? But there's like a pump with a reservoir flammable something in it and a wave to ignite fire. That to me, just giving it just a little bit of thought as to how it might work. I don't need to know everything about it. I don't need to be able to diagram it or anything, but just enough to be able to say, like, there's a smell in the air. You smell something weird, right? There's something about the floor. There's a part of it that's discolored. They don't know what the trap is. They don't know what's going on, but I have an environmental descriptor that tells them something's up here. And then it's up to them how cautiously they proceed, how much information they gather, whether or not they try to trigger the trap ahead of time. But it's like those old cartoons, right? You ever watch those like old ones from like 20s or 30s or whatever, where it's like the background's all this just matte painting and they're doing the cell animation on top of it. And you can see the part of the background that's about to be interacted with because it's different. It stands out. And that's kind of how I look at those clues. And I want to reward player interaction with the environment. I want them to describe their interactions with the environment to me, not just talk about the skills they use in game terms. I want them to say, like, I'm getting down on all fours, belly to the ground, trying to suss out what's going on with this floor. staying back, but we got the torch going on. Like, I want to describe that. That's interaction. That's the environmental pillar, right? Like, or the exploration pillar, rather. And so I want to be able to provide those kind of clues so that then they're like, well, something's up. I also like the click rule, which I know over on Monarch's Factory, Dale Kingsmill's talked about. I've heard Angry GM use something similar of like when a trap is triggered, that you basically go click, or some, sort of audible signal to the players that they have just a couple of seconds to give you a blurted out, I dive, I jump out of the way, I jump back, I raise my shield, I grab my friend and dive, just whatever it is, instant. It might mean that they don't have to make any save because they jumped back when they needed to, or they jumped forward and now they're cut off from the party by a falling block or pit trap or something. Maybe what they said necessitates advantage on the save or gives them advantage on that save. Maybe means they don't get to make a save at all because they walked right into it, But it's sort of a house rule for running traps that gives the players just something to make a decision about other than what color die to roll on their saving throw. And I really like that. And so coupled with details of the environment to tip them off that it's worth investigating further. And if they accidentally trigger it or inadvertently trigger it, they have a second to do something. And then I just try to rely on description as much as I can before I resort to die rolls. Always leaving the door open that they might disarm the trap without ever needing to make a die roll because they just do it. That's how I like running traps. My favorite thing to do with the traps is just like, this is a big open pit with spikes in it. It's 20 feet across. How do you get over it? Oh, what, he's a flyer? All of you are flyers? What a terrible DM I am. Anyway, here's the last question, guys. Sagwin asks, how can I help my players be more proactive and think about the consequences of their actions? Consequences is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. I'm curious what we mean by this, because I know I see where you're coming from. I bet you're a DM, right? Asking a question about how to get your players to be more proactive. And like, you're wanting them to think seriously about the world, probably to take it seriously, to observe how it responds to the players. I understand this impulse. This is why I keep coming back to DMing. I love this when players do that. A lot of players aren't interested in that at all. They play the game because they don't want to have to deal with consequences because they got enough of that shit in their real life. And this is one of those things where getting clear about what you mean by consequences and how you see it benefiting your game. Because for a lot of players, consequences mean bullshit that is going to make the game not fun. And too much of it will just drag a game down. I've been part of games where the weight of consequence has made the game unplayable because the group, the game, the party is paralyzed in any decision they have to make because so far the consequences have been so dire that it's stifled gameplay. That can happen. And so I think like it might take you being softer and more lenient than you would want to, or ideally would like, or, whatever, to signal that not every consequence is bullshit. Not every consequence is going to make the game unfun or take something away from the players or mean that they fucked up. Sometimes they get away consequence free. Sometimes they get what they want and their cake and eat it too. Sometimes it sucks. They don't get what they want. What I find is that, like, when you don't force the players into any one situation, you don't say like, you're doing this, you have to, even though you've signaled you don't, through bullshit DM illusionism, railroad shit, and you let them sort of pick the level of challenge that they want, how in over their heads they want to get, and you just sort of play the world, impartial referee, treat it fairly, but take it seriously. Hope they succeed, but you're not like nudging things in their favor if they don't, not making it unduly difficult. Then it's like, you'll start to build a game where consequences are a neutral thing, and they're just what happens when the players make decisions, and they'll get used to the fact that like the world's going to react to them. The world is not built for their entertainment necessarily. Like that's not the only thing it's built for, because yes it is, but no it isn't, right? And that like it's okay for them to push against the setting. I think a lot of players, and this is my experience in my early days of playing, and even up till the last year or so, where you push and you go like, well, I want to do this one thing. I'd like to do this. Is this allowed? Can I? Or am I going to hit an invisible wall of some kind? For me, as a DM, I just try to make the wall visible. And if they try to do something and I'm not ready for it, I just be like, hey, I'm just not ready for that. Can I have time? Can we do this next time we play? If it's something they really want to do now, are they okay with me just winging it? And just to let them know where my limits are, so that there's an expectation that can build up when you're not like talking about these things as people playing a game together, that can be palpable. I've played with groups where there's a real sense amongst the players that there's a right and a wrong answer the DM's looking for, and we don't know it. But whether or not we get to keep playing is dependent on this right or wrong answer. And so that sort of starts creating a play style for the players of just waiting to be led by the DM, because we want to play. We've got these characters we like rolling dice, spending time with each other's. The potential is there. But like every time we try to go away that it doesn't seem the DM's ready for, we hit those invisible walls. That can create a sense that it's bad to be proactive and to wait for the DM to put something that you're supposed to interact with in your lap. And so if you have players who've had that experience, who've come up with that, and I've played with people like that, have DM'd with people, for people like that, it can seem weird and uncomfortable to be proactive. It might seem like a situation where there could be like real life consequences. Like we could have an argument in real life, friendship fallout. So I think gauge your players. What level of proactivity are they looking for? Let them know you would like for them to be more proactive and that it's welcome, right? You might need to let them know explicitly consequences aren't always going to be bad, right? The more proactive you are, the more you might get what you want without consequences. And to be even-handed and fair, to maybe be more transparent in your rulings than you might otherwise be open to criticism and feedback from the players. Be willing to hear their arguments that run counter to your rulings, like not to the point where the game stalls out, but listen to them. That's how you'll foster an environment where your players will trust that whatever they ask to do, you're going to take it in good faith and give it a shot. And like, I know for me, like getting to play with a DM like that is very refreshing, because I want to play in a game where like we do some cool shit, and like I want all of us involved, and like I'm here to play this game and take risks, and I don't want to play it safe. I want to get messy while we play with this and take the world seriously. And yeah, I want consequences, because that means there's something that's at stake here. There's an emotional high that I get when there's real consequences. But I also need to feel that freedom to try things that maybe the DM wouldn't have wanted to do or didn't think was going to happen, but is still open to the possibility of. Because if it's like you present this world and there's consequences, and a lot of times this comes hand in hand with like grim dark or low fantasy style gaming, not always, but a lot of times. But it's like, well, wait a minute, we didn't pick this. We would have rather done something else, or feel forced into the situations too much. And like that that's not a good situation. So you got to be open-minded and willing to let let the players kind of engage with the world at their choosing, and not just like hit them over the head with big brickload of terrible consequences. Show them that it's this makes the game better, more fun, not more punishing. I hope that helps, because really talking about fostering trust and play style, and that's difficult to do, right? Like, people have their own comfort zones, what they like and don't like, and what they want and don't want, and it starts by just talking about it with them. So yeah. Sorry about, I guess there was some mic issues at some points, but I don't know what it'd be. I've got a thing that's rubbing a zipper. Could be that. Who knows? I'm in an unfinished basement in a New England winter. There's all kinds of weird noises going on around me. So it's weird. I literally am live streaming from a dungeon. So I hope you guys had a nice time. It's been fun. We'll keep doing these, but I think we're going to try to get a proper video for you for next week. Got a video on DM prep and session prep in like long-term campaigns, and how to keep track of that on my mind. So I think we might do one of those soon. So yeah, appreciate you guys hanging out, and love the questions. We took as many of them as we could find, copied them. We have our big Q&A doc. A lot of these we answer over on Patreon, but we also answer them on our podcast over on Webium Talks. So if you haven't checked us out there through podcasting app, you might want to, because I'd much rather answer y'all's questions, because it's like, that's what you guys want to hear. So yeah, hope you guys have a great week, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks for hanging out.